joining us today for this really interesting seminar into Ministries of Food to National Food Councils, looking at the whole of government and whole of food system governance, basically, and institutions for doing that. Before we get going, I will just do an acknowledgement of country. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on here in Canberra, which for me is the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I'd like to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and contribution that they make to the life of this city and region, and especially to our food system. I'm just wondering if you could please mute if you're coming in. Thank you very much. So look, and just to extend that welcome to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. And if you'd like to, please pop in the chat which traditional lands you're on today. Today is very special. We have a fabulous guest, Dr. Dori Pate, who is a research fellow from the University of Sydney. Now, Dori is the leader of the Centre for Health Policy, Economics and Data there, and is rapidly becoming a rock star in the world of food system governance, and has recently released a couple of papers that we will pop in the chat as we go. And today, Dori's going to introduce us to her work, which is very much looking at what options countries around the world have started to experiment with when it comes to multi-sector and holistic governance of the food system. What's worked, what hasn't worked, and what looks like it might be relevant to Australia. Now, I'd love to get you to start thinking about questions for that, and because this has got some policy connotations and things like that, if you'd like to submit a truly anonymous question to the group today, please send me an email. I'll be monitoring those as we go. But otherwise, please put queries and things in the chat, and we'll try and do those. We'll try and marshal those and have a chat afterwards. Dori, would you like to jump in and share this really quite fabulous work? Thank you.
Thank you, Rohan, and thank you for this amazing introduction. While I'm sharing my screen, I just want to put it out there that in terms of my affiliation, so I'm a research fellow at the Leader Center for Health Policy, Economics and Data. So I'm not the leader of the center. Maybe it was just me hearing it. I think my bosses would be freaking out if that's not how he would try to sell me here. But having said that, I would like to also to start with saying that I'm here talking on behalf of a big multinational collaboration. This research program is part of an NHMRC partnership grant led by Professor Anne-Marie Thaw. And we are working together with the University of Sydney. We are from the University of Sydney. We have Deakin University as part of this collaboration, also the WHO, the World Health Organization, and this broader partnership grant also is lucky because we are partnering with policymakers across the country. So from the state government of Queensland, New South Wales, and Tasmania. So I like to say this always because I like to highlight that the research we do is applied policy research. So we are coming in with our academic background and academic lens, investigating policy issues, with the understanding that we want to learn from best practices. We want to learn from what people done right across the world, and then bring it home to Australia, and also to share it with other countries and other policymakers around the world. For this particular food system governance study, we also have the World Food Programme as one of our collaborators. So we are really lucky because this field of research, specifically food system governance, is now becoming more and more important. At least people recognize the importance of it. I would like to also thank you, CSIRO, for recognizing this research as something worthy to present in this webinar series. And I'm really happy to see that there are policymakers from across different levels in Australia, from Australia's government. So just to to start with a very simple introduction, we all know what food systems are, but I would like to reiterate that during this presentation, I will talk about social, economic, and environmental outcomes for food systems. And this is basically the simplified way, the way I'm describing these particular 5 food system outcomes. So in the research we do, what we are trying to understand is how can we strengthen food system governance in a way that we can ensure that food systems, they deliver sustainable livelihoods, healthy and affordable, equitable diets. They are resilient to climate change and are also environmentally sustainable, but at the same time are inclusive for everyone. So every time when I mention that we want to make sure that social, economic, and environmental objectives should be achieved by the food system, I really mean all these 5 outcomes. But the reason why we are here today, because, and I'm sure many people are in this call today, because you know that achieving these outcomes at the same time is really difficult. When we look at food systems around the world, we see that food systems, they might achieve a particular set of outcomes for a particular set of actors, but to make sure that it is really inclusive and really everyone benefits from it all across the board, across these range of domains, it's actually a huge challenge. And if we are looking at this challenge as a governance problem, it is quite easy to understand why this is so difficult for policymakers to solve. These 3 blocks you see in this slide is my really, really simplified description of the food system, really, really simplified. But what I'm trying to show with this picture is, and again, excuse me that I'm including ministries here and not naming actual real departments from Australia. As I mentioned, this is a global research and most of our studies are, or most of the findings are informed from other countries where ministries are more common than departments. But at the end of the day, it refers to the unit of government who are making policies around these sectors. So the key takeaway from this slide should be is the food systems on the government level, even if we're just looking at the highest national or federal level, are governed by a really high range of government agencies. And on top of that, we also know, especially if you're thinking about more progressive approaches or thinking about governance, is that the way food systems are governed are not just through government agencies, but private sector actors, civil society actors, communities. They all have a way of shaping how our food system is steered. This is why it's so important to understand that food systems are massive and complex, and for us to try to achieve these 5 different, or we can say 3 sets of different outcomes across environmental, economic, and societal goals is really challenging, because every type of actor has different ideas about what the food system should deliver. Most people on the call probably might agree what it should deliver, but really there are a lot of different ideas about what it should deliver and also how the food system should function. And because these ideas are so different, and of course, very often they are conflicting, it's really difficult to come to an agreement or even just on the government level to come to an agreement of how we would like to visualize, or at least what vision we want for our food systems. So we know that there are conflicting interests, there are conflicting mandates and conflicting ideas about food systems in the government level. And I'm not talking about Australia specifically, but in general, all countries, they struggle with the same issues. We also see power asymmetries. Now, I know that many of you immediately going to think about big agribusiness actors or big large food manufacturers who usually have a lot of power in the food systems. But there are also power asymmetries within government as well. We know very often that, if you ever try to get money from any government around the world, the Ministry of Finance is really powerful. And we also see that depending on context, there are certain ministries who usually have a bigger say in what gets implemented and what doesn't get implemented. The other issue what we see is that the nature of government is that the work is organized into ministerial lines or into departmental lines across policy silos. And this naturally helps to organize the work, but at the same time, naturally also creates disconnection. So we see that there is a disconnect between government agencies where different ministries are implementing their really, really good policies. But if there is not enough communication between the ministries, we do see that these policies, they have a tendency to negatively impact on each other. And then we are standing there wasting a lot of resources and don't understand why a perfectly planned policy does not deliver the outcome what we want to deliver. At the same time, we have the disconnection also there in terms of between the non-state actors and the government agencies. So because food system governance encompasses such a wide range of actors from the private sector to civil society to UN agencies and so on, it is really important that there is a connection and a dialogue between them. But I will talk about later that this doesn't necessarily mean that we are spreading decision-making across all of these actors. I will come to this point. These are really important part of this research around who should govern food systems, but then I will also talk about what we found, who actually governs food systems around the world. The conceptual foundations of this work, what I will talk about here today, we published a paper about this at Nature Food. Lily or Rohan probably will share the link or the paper itself in the chat. If anyone would like to have a full copy of the paper, I'm really happy to share it. But based on the work we've been doing on food system governance in the recent years, we noticed that there's a lot of conversation around that there needs to be a whole of food system governance approach in each country, because that will ensure that we can resolve those issues around disconnection, power asymmetries, and balancing interests and ideas. But while there has been a lot of talk about it, that there is a need for it to happen, we haven't really seen solutions out there. We haven't really seen ideas about how it should actually be operationalized. And this question was driving our research. And therefore, in this commentary, you can see that we are introducing a system which basically posits that the government is the central actor here. The first step is to create alignment and connection between the different government agencies. And then the next step is to reach out to non-state actors. I'm happy to talk about it a little bit later, but I'm also really excited to show you what we actually found in practice, not just what we theorized. But also, let me clarify the terminology here. So you will see that we often use the term whole of government approaches to food system governance, or we can say whole of government institutions in food system governance. So whole of government means that all the departments, all the ministries who have an important role in governing any part of the food system, they are technically sitting around the same table. It's really important that certain ministries are not left out, who have an important role in the food system. So if the Ministry of Environment is left out, or the department, then it is a problem. If the Department of Health is left out, again, there is a big problem. Now, when we talk about whole of food system governance, that's when we attach the whole of society approach in. So the whole of food system governance means that you have all the relevant government agencies there, and there is an engagement between the government agencies and the different range of non-state actors, as I mentioned, from food producers, different private sectors actors across the food supply chain, the different non-governmental organizations, civil society, academia, research institutions as well. So the idea is that the rest of the society is brought in, but there are different ways how they can be brought in. The idea, the theory behind whole of government food systems, and you will see that in this presentation, I will start with whole of government, because most of the examples we found in our study, they were whole of government approaches, but a whole of government approach can be a whole of food system approach as well. And I'm not saying that a whole of food system governance approach is the must. Again, by the end of it, you will see that there are nuances here, and I will try to emphasize that we don't have to go for the biggest, most expensive, most complicated approach. But the idea behind the whole of government system, that depending on how this whole of government institution is designed, and when I mean whole of government institution, this can be a National Food Council, this can be a food security committee, a food system committee. These are basically names for the same things, which can look very different in terms of the structure. But very often we saw that something is called a National Food Council, and in other countries it is equivalent to a food system committee. basically it's terminology. What is really important for understand that just because you read National Food Council somewhere, it doesn't actually tell us anything about how the council itself is structured. But a whole of government institution can be a coordinating ministry. So it can be an individual unit, or it can be a mechanism which brings actors together. Again, I will talk about it later. The idea is, though, that if these whole of government institutions are designed well and they are resourced well, then they have the potential to increase the connectivity between not just the government agencies, but potentially the non-state actors as well. This engagement can help increase or can help redress or decrease the power asymmetries, and they can help create the systems thinking between across the different actors within the food system, so they understand better where their role is, how their role impacts other actors in the food system, how they can work together, how they can develop then a common vision, and therefore somehow balance interests in ideas. So you see, it's a very normative thinking behind it. We are being very ambitious, but soon I will show you that there are examples out there across the world where this is actually is in place. So the idea is that we're gonna, at the end of the day, increase alignment between policies. So we increase policy coherence and resulting in more collective action, which will eventually improve better, or it will improve food system outcomes across these social, economic, and environmental domains. The majority of this presentation today talks about the result of our finding, which I think it's been already shared in the chat. So as I said, we came up with the theory of why whole of government food system institutions could be useful and how they could address these serious issues in food system governance. And then we went on and we actually mapped who is doing this, who is actually implementing any such approach, so we can learn from the good examples of other countries, and we can develop not guidance, but we can develop lessons and insights for other governments who are considering implementing certain approaches. Because what is really important that we are here not trying to find a blueprint, but purely understand that is this just a big idea what we have around whole of government food system governance or whole of food system governance? Is it just a nice idea which can never be put in practice because it's just too hard? Or is there actually a way to get it done? So the good news is that we found 34 countries who are actually experimenting with this. And the really interesting thing is that with this study, we primarily relied on policy documents. But again, I like to shout out to all those policymakers, because we didn't only go straight away to 34 countries. We approached policymakers, governments in 197 countries around the world, and we particularly we worked with policy documents. So if there was a proof in a policy document that a mechanism exists and it met our really rigorous criteria, then it made it to our list. But we also talked to policymakers to make sure that we find all the relevant policy documents. We didn't want to miss anything just because we don't speak a country's language or because certain documents are not available publicly. So, and I was so humbled because as a researcher, yes, University of Sydney is a very well-known university around the world, but I was amazed that from all of those countries, people, they were replying to our emails and they were telling us what they have in place and what they don't have in place. And just because there are policymakers out there who are open, who are brave to talk about their systems, even if their system is not perfect, this enabled us to do this research, to pull these findings together. And now that we can share these findings with other people in the world who don't have yet those mechanisms in place. So again, I'm so thankful for policymakers out there. And again, this also shout out to our partners in Australia, because we've been getting so much really good feedback in co-designing this study and also making sure that what we're developing out of this study is actually useful in Australia. So what we found is that across these 34 countries, 4 countries decided to establish a dedicated agency for whole of government food system governance. So dedicated agency could be a ministry, or it could be a certain unit, basically one agency taking up the coordinating role. Interestingly, the other 30 countries, they decided that instead of establishing a brand new agency. They rather created councils, roundtables, or basically they created mechanisms of forums where everyone already working in the food system, they were invited to join in. And I'm going to unpack this now. This graph shows that we found 8 different approaches for the mechanisms. So the mechanisms when it's not an individual ministry, but when it's this could be for example, a National Food Council would fall under a mechanism, or a committee, roundtables. So again, as I mentioned, they are called different names, and sometimes they're not called food systems. Sometimes they are referred to as food security mechanisms or food security committees. But when you read into what their objectives are and what actors they bring together, they actually fulfill the criteria, are really robust criteria of whole of government approaches to food system governance. I'm not going to go into this much detail here, but as you can see, the important thing is here that we could see 10 different approaches. So for example, if a government decides that they want to establish a mechanism like a National Food Council, they have so many options. They can make it only single level. It means that there is one table there, and around one table, all the government agencies sit. So all the dark blue are the government agencies, the light blues are the non-government agencies. So, in some countries, they decided that around the table, it should be only the government agencies, and the non-state actors are engaged, but they're not members of the table. So they don't have decision-making power. It is the government who only has the right to decide on policies. Now, in some countries, like in Sudan, there is a 2-layer level. So there is basically the same only governmental approach, so only state actors are there, but there is a level for technical experts, and there's a level for political expertise where the ministers are sitting. And then you have these other approaches where the non-state actors are brought in to the circle. Either they are sitting around the same table, or they have these mixed tables, or they have their separate table and they come together, but there are a lot of different approaches here. What is important to note, though, that in many countries, non-state actors, they don't put into one bucket, but they differentiate by non-state actors. So what it means that they would pick and choose which non-state actors they want. So they would make sure some countries, they only include local NGOs. Some countries, they only include small and small-scale food producers, and they explicitly exclude large transnational corporations. Or they include them, but they don't give them any decision-making rights. So what is important here, and again, we published another paper on this, how governments, they have a lot of options in how they engage non-state actors. They can be actively involved without the government needing to give up its decision-making power. And again, it's important to recognize that these mechanisms, especially those which are participatory, so bringing non-state actors, they need to be a space where power asymmetries between non-state actors are leveled. And the way you do this is that you need to allocate different amount of roles and different amount of decision-making power to the weaker actors, or to the different actors who are non-governmental actors. Anyway, we can talk about this later and during the discussion if anyone is particularly interested, but we actually have a separate paper about this, which I should have shared with Rohan, but it's called The 50 Shades of Partnership. I suggest you look it up. It's a really interesting read. So what happened in those countries who decided that they're going to establish a Ministry of Food? And I know that a lot of people are really excited about the idea of having a Ministry of Food in place. But again, there are different approaches to this. So in some countries, the Ministry of Food, like in Bangladesh, has been existing since the 70s because they established it mostly for food security reasons, so to avoid famines. But these days, they basically expanded their roles, and now they are also looking after nutrition and also environmental sustainability. So they have economic objectives, so they have objectives all across the board. The interesting thing with Bangladesh, though, or with the ministries of food, that they remain at the same level as the other ministries, like as the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Trade, or Finance. And because they are at the same level, they don't necessarily have the convening power to actually make the other ministries adjust their policies. And then, as you can imagine, because the food system is governed by so many different ministries, there are naturally overlaps between the mandate of the Ministry of Food and those other ministries, and handling those overlaps is challenging. You will see that with each of the approaches we found here, there are pros and cons. So I'm not going to end up saying that, yes, the best approach is this certain approach in this country, but I'm going to highlight that, yes, there are positives, but there are disadvantages as well. In every country, they will need to really think about what is their context calling for, what pros and cons match their own context. So, for example, another country, Indonesia, they decided to overcome these issues of not having the suprasectoral mandate, and they established the Coordinating Ministry of Food Affairs. So the Coordinating Ministry of Food Affairs is basically receives suprasectoral authority, but not all over all of the ministries, because if anyone is familiar with Indonesia's governance structure, they have at least 30 different ministries who are related to food production and the food systems. So the coordinating ministry does not try to engage with or coordinate all of these 30 ministries, but they picked the 6 most important ones for food systems, and the coordinating ministry for food affairs is managing or overseeing those ministries. So here there is a suprasectoral power, which is actually really helpful because it gives them the authority to make sure that those ministries, they actually align those policies. So they have the power to create policy coherence. What is, again, something that always comes up in the discussions is that should we establish completely new structures and abolish the old ones, or should we build on existing structures? And what we see that in many countries, instead of building new ones, they take the old ones, which could be a Ministry of Agriculture, and they add the food security aspect of it, but not just food security in a sense to make sure that people, they have something to eat, but food security in the broader sense to make sure that all those food system outcomes are delivered. They just call it food security rather than food systems, because food security sounds like a much more urgent issue. The framing of food security usually is able to bring a lot more political attention and political commitment than food systems, which just sounds fancy and complicated. So we did see that in some countries they use existing mechanisms or existing agencies. It happened that basically they might rebranding them completely, or they just added an extra role of doing the coordination besides all the other tasks what they had to do. And we do see, though, completely new mechanisms and completely new ministries, like some of the ones I mentioned before.
Dory, you asked me to keep an eye on the time, so just you said you might get carried away, so just in case.
Yes, thank you, Rohan. I might just skip through this one. We did look at the different ministries, but because different different agencies and institutions, they might have different roles. So not all of them have the different functions. But I suggest you look at the policy brief. We have this figure in it, and you can learn more about it. So as I implied already, there is no such thing as the best solution, but right now we are doing a research to at least come up with the better solutions. So what we are doing right now, that we are, and this research is ongoing at the moment, we are going back to the 34 identified countries, and we are doing interviews with policymakers, and we are asking questions about exactly how does it work, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses. If anyone wants to set up a mechanism like Brazil has, or like what Sweden has, what should we know about this mechanism? If Australia wants to set up something what Sweden has, for example, then we can give the advice, or we can just transfer the knowledge to Australia. This is an ongoing research. We will have the preliminary results already early next year, so stay tuned because we hope to come back with this. The second next step we do for this work is to develop an evaluation framework to actually assess how well whole of government institutions function. Not so much for the food system outcome part, because there are a lot of evaluation frameworks out there for the food systems, but at the moment there is no framework which would show us how the governance issues around power asymmetries, disconnectivity, conflicting interest, how these are being changed by a well-established whole of government food system approach. So this is a completely new work. We are working on this as well, and hopefully soon we will have some idea. But again, with the evaluation framework, the idea is not that we want to go and judge people and evaluate countries. But we do see in our current research that sustainability is a really big issue. So countries, they often establish a mechanism which looks amazing, but if a government changes, suddenly the political will disappears and then the funding disappears. And this is the point where it's really important for policymakers to be able to show that no, although we have not had enough time to create better food system outcomes yet, we can already showcase how this mechanism has improved the governance of food system governance already. So this is the goal of this framework, not to judge or actually measure, but mostly to showcase the performance and showcase the good things coming out of whole of government approaches. And I will stop it here. I'm going to stop sharing and I give it back to Rohan for the discussion. Thank you.
Look, thanks so much, Dory. That was absolutely fabulous. And look, just as per our practice, I'm going to stop recording for the conversation part. And please, if